Hi, we're going to read another fairy tale today. This one is again a kind of obscure one that people probably aren't as used to. At least I wasn't used to this one growing up, but it's in my fairy tale book. So when I read it, I felt like there was some good stuff that we could talk about here. So let's get into it. This one is called Riffraff. A rooster said to the hen, "The nuts are ripe, so let's go over to the hill and eat our fill of nuts before the squirrels go and haul them all away." "Okay," said the hen, "let's go and have a great time." So they went up to the hill, and since it was such a bright day, they stayed there all day long until the evening. Now, I don't know whether it was because they stuffed themselves too much or whether they had become too high and mighty, but they didn't want to return home on foot. So the rooster had to build a small carriage made out of nut shells. Once the rooster finished, the hen got in and said, "Now you can harness yourself to it." "No," said the rooster, "you have nerve. I'd rather go home walking than be harnessed to this carriage. No, that wasn't our bargain. I'd gladly be coachman and sit in that carriage, but I refuse to pull it." While they were quarreling, a duck came by, quacking, and said, "Thieves! Who said you could come up over here? This is my nut hill." "Oh, you'll pay for this." And this duck charged at the rooster with a wide open beak, but the rooster was on his toes and threw himself at the duck's body really hard. Then he dug his claws into her so violently that the duck begged for mercy and then let herself be harnessed to the carriage as punishment. Now the rooster sat down on the box as coachman, and off they went. "Duck, you run fast!" cried the rooster. After they went some distance, they encountered a couple of travelers on foot, a needle and a pin. The needle and pin called and asked them to stop. They said it would be very dark soon and they wouldn't be able to go another step. Besides, the road was dirty, so they wanted a ride. They had been at the tailor's tavern outside the town gate and had had too many drinks, so that also made it late for them. Since they were thin and didn't really take up much room, the rooster let them both get in, but they had to promise not to step on him or the hen's feet. So later that evening, they came to an inn, and they didn't want to travel any further because the duck wasn't walking very well and was swaying from side to side. At first, the innkeeper raised a bunch of objections and said, "Nah, the inn is already full." And he also thought that they didn't look very distinguished. But they sweet talked him. They offered him the egg that the hen had laid along the way, and they told him that he could also keep the duck, who also laid an egg a day. So finally he relented and said that they could spend the night. They ordered some good hot food and had a great time. Early the next morning, as the sun was rising and everyone was asleep, the rooster woke the hen. They fetched her egg, they pecked it open, and then they ate it themselves. Then they put the eggshells on the hearth and went to the needle, who was still sleeping. They grabbed the needle by the head and stuck him into the innkeeper's chair. And then they went and took the pin and put it in the innkeeper's towel. Finally, they flew away over the heath. The duck, who liked to sleep in the open and had spent the night in the yard, heard their wings flapping, so she woke up, found a brook, and swam away, which was much faster than being harnessed to a carriage. A few hours later, the innkeeper himself got out of bed. He washed himself and then took his towel to dry himself. However, when he did, the pin scratched his face, leaving a red mark from ear to ear. Then he went to the kitchen and lit his pipe, but when he leaned over the hearth, the eggshells popped into his eyes. "Oh, everything's attacking me this morning," he said. So he went down to sit in his chair, already in a bad mood. But then he jumped up immediately and screamed, "Ow!" The needle stuck him worse than the pin. Now he was completely angry and suspected the guests who had arrived so late the night before. But when he went looking for them, they were gone. He swore that he would never let Riffraff stay at his inn again, especially when they eat so much, pay nothing, and play mean tricks. All right, that's the story. Uh, so it starts out with these bickering chickens, really, this rooster and the hen. So they're kind of funny. They're this bickering couple. They're focused on personal pleasure. They just want to get those nuts for themselves. Then they get lazy. They're gluttonous. They lack this foresight, and they have poor communication between the two of them from the get go. Um, but then we find out that's not bad enough. They're also violent. The rooster, you know, claws this duck that saying, "Hey, this is my area," takes advantage of the duck, and the both of them have the duck take them somewhere else in exchange, probably for her life. Right? Like some pretty villainous chickens, if you ask me. You ever meet people who they are just lazy? They will use other people. They think that everyone else needs to serve them. That life is about serving themselves, right? Um, Now, strangely, they come upon this pin and needle on the road, right? Like, what these inanimate objects are now animate, um, but they are also. It's interesting that they've also like had too much beer to drink, so clearly they're a little bit irresponsible. They need a little uh, help, we'll say, and so this it's interesting that the hen and rooster even allow them in the carriage, but they say, "Oh, well, they're not going to take a lot of room up, um, as long as they don't disturb us, right?" Like it's interesting that people, or let's say chickens here, that they are willing to help only so far. Like, oh, you're not an inconvenience to me, so sure, why not? Um, it's not the best example to follow, right? Uh, and we should kind of wonder what's the better example? What's something that we could strive to do and become and improve upon their behavior? Like, well, they were willing to pick them up in the first place. Maybe that's a good thing, but maybe it's the attitude with which they are picking them up. First off, you shouldn't be abusing somebody else. This duck that's pulling all of them. It's not like picking them up was really an inconvenience for the hen and rooster, but even if it was an inconvenience, should we help somebody out? I think yeah. So they get to this inn, right? The innkeeper has some objections, saying, "Well, this crowd looks a little rowdy, right?" And he was right. It was a rowdy crowd, and I think that there is some value in his immediate judgment that he makes. Now, I do believe that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, usually, but I do think that we can quickly discern when we're going to be taken advantage of or when there's something dangerous to be aware of. And it's wise to keep on that discernment hat instead of just saying, "Oh, well, I'm not supposed to judge, so I won't." Well, that's not going to get us anywhere. That's going to actually get us taken advantage of more often. Um, Discernment is a value that we should all be striving for. Now, of course, these lazy, gluttonous, selfish chickens are good at sweet talking. That's probably something that just comes along with the territory of this is how you live your life. If you're not willing to work, you have to be able to talk yourself up or talk yourself into the inn. Now, um, they early the next morning, rather than paying with the egg, they eat that egg themselves. I don't know if there's significance of them eating their own egg. That seems strange to me. But they're liars. They don't keep their end of the bargain. Um, And they didn't care about the innkeeper. They were there for themselves. Interestingly, they fly away. So this rooster and hen, who they've stuffed themselves, and then they build. First off, they build a carriage. That it's not like that's easy, but they build something out of these nut shells, and then they're not willing. Like they didn't want to walk, but then later they can fly away. I mean, talk about flighty, right? Like someone who isn't what they appear to be, or someone that's very unreliable. Looks like they can't do something and they end up doing something else, and it's just flighty is definitely the right word here. And to top it all off, not only are they dishonest, but then they put these pin and needle to stick this innkeeper. Like, you do enough damage by taking advantage of somebody, you don't need to make it worse by actively hurting them. And so um, these this innkeeper, um, again, his intuition was right initially, and he suspected those guests, and he was right. Now, it's sad because he ends up resolving, like, I'm not ever going to let anyone like this back here again. Now, I don't blame him. In this story, the villains are the hen and the rooster, right? And I think we can learn that when somebody does treat us poorly, uh, it's important to consider how we look to them. Now, like, imagine if somebody thinks that you're that hen or rooster, if you're the riffraff, think, okay, did I do something? Did I say something that makes them view me this way? And if so, how can I change? I don't want to look like riffraff. I don't want to be the one that takes advantage of somebody else and leaves them without payment for a service that they've provided. That's not a good quality to have. And we should be able to consider, okay, maybe I'm doing something that's signaling this to them. Um, I I find that people usually have reasons for their behavior, for their suspicions, for whatever. So it's sad, but we learn. So this is kind of, I don't know if it's a moral in this story, but we learn that just a few bad actors can ruin the trust for an entire group. And it's too bad that this innkeeper had a tougher time trusting from then on just because of these few. Because when you look at it, like, an innkeeper is a profession where this person has the potential to help a lot of others if they need hospitality and need a place to stay. And there might be others who are genuinely in need of help that this innkeeper probably won't help because riffraff from this hen and rooster destroyed his sense of trust. Now, um, kind of like many of these fairy tales, we leave with this sort of yucky, icky feeling, like, wow, they just flew away, like they didn't even get their heads chopped off and eaten. Like, that's kind of what I expected when I started reading, like, oh yeah, like it'll probably end in death because people like eating hens and roosters, right. And so they got away. And I think it's okay to remember from stories like this that there are people who get away with all of the riffraff that they engage in, and um, it feels unjust. But we need to remember that things like this happen, and I don't know if there's a moral judgment that we can draw to justice here, but it's okay to sit with that feeling of knowing, like, they did something wrong with no consequence, and acknowledging that that is wrong, um, is an important thing that we can talk about. So anyway, that's the story of, I guess it's called Riffraff, this rooster and hen that just selfishly took advantage of everybody. And I hope that I'm not riffraff. I hope that people decide not to be riffraff, and and that we can increase the levels of trust with everybody that we're around. Hi, I just realized that I used riffraff in a weird way. So, riffraff isn't really behavior, it's more like an unruly group of people. I think the only place I've heard the word riffraff is in Aladdin, the Disney movie Aladdin, where they call him riffraff. It's like just kind of a people who stir up trouble. So it's not really a behavior. It's like something, it's a thing, it's a noun, it's a person, it's a group of people that cause that trouble. So ignore the way that I used riffraff whenever I was saying you engage in riffraff. Maybe you engage like riffraff or with riffraff. Don't be a riffraffer.